Law and Crime Network, everybody. I'm Rachel Stockman, and we'll be with you this afternoon as we take a deep dive into more fascinating cases that we've covered as we wait for some great trials to begin later this afternoon, but more likely later this week. Let's take you now to the Nicholas Godejohn murder trial. He's expected to be sentenced very shortly. He was convicted of first-degree murder in the 2015 killing of Claudine, quote, DeeDee Blanchard. You probably remember this trial because it involved his girlfriend, Gypsy Blanchard, who says she was abused. There, a picture of her is right there. She says she was abused for years and years by her mother, who convinced her that she was ill with all of these different ailments. She was even bound to a wheelchair for years until she realized she was really under the spell of her mother. This all went to trial because Gypsy Blanchard is accused of conspiring with her boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn, to kill Gypsy Blanchard's mother. Fascinating case. Let's take a look at some of the prosecution's opening statements.
Outside of Claudine Blanchard's bedroom door stood the defendant, dressed in all black, wearing blue latex gloves, holding a knife. For the defendant, he was in love with Gypsy Blanchard, Claudine's daughter. And as he stood there, the only thing that stood between him being with Gypsy was Claudine. And so he stood there holding that knife for a minute, considering and deliberating the murder of Claudine Blanchard. That led to him standing outside of Claudine's bedroom door with gloves on, dressed in black, holding a knife, and thinking, the bitch is dead. And the evidence will show that after that deliberation on June 10th of 2015, he entered that bedroom and stabbed Claudine Blanchard to death.
And that's some of the prosecution's opening statements. I think the prosecutor there doing a very good job of very concisely laying out the case against Nicholas Godejohn. I want to bring in my guest for this hour, Marni Snyder. She joins me via Skype, a criminal defense attorney. I do have one question, Marni, about those openings. Why is the prosecutor so obsessed, it seems, with trying to tell the jurors about this deliberation factor? Why is that such a key part of the prosecution's opening?
Well, I think that I think he knows what the defense is going to be and smart enough to figure that out. And he's trying to say that even someone with diminished capacity, when they have all these different opportunities to deliberate, even a person that has autism or some other issues should then come to know that killing is wrong, that he understood that he intended to do it anyway. And so really it's the length of the deliberations as well as the quality of deliberations, and they really have to concentrate on length here.
All right, so you hinted to it. Let's get to the defense's opening statements in the case against Nicholas Godejohn out of Missouri.
Gypsy knew there was only one way she was going to be able to spend a life with Nick. There was only one way to get out from under the grasp of her mother, and that was to kill her mother. Gypsy formulated this plan, and she wavered on it. For a while, she was committed to it. Later, she decided, no, that's not the right thing. Nick was happy to do whatever Gypsy wanted. He was always compliant. Nick arrived there at the house. Knife was ready, gloves were ready, tape was ready. He entered that home and saw Gypsy standing there. A girl who could walk, not someone captive in a wheelchair. Looking around the living room, there were wheelchairs. The devices that bound her. And Nick went through with Gypsy's plan.
Went through with Gypsy's plan. That is what the defense attorney said in the opening statements of the Nicholas Godejohn case in Missouri. Marni Jo, we were just talking about this before we went to that clip. Is that something that jurors could conceivably buy that, listen, this guy was not very smart. He was on the autism spectrum. And that he was really brainwashed by Gypsy to do what he did. It was her plan.
I don't know. I mean, we're going to see what the nitty-gritty is that made the defense pick this as their defense and the way to argue it. But I thought it was interesting to paint Gypsy as the killer that was manipulative and that kind of outsmarted this man, because it really seemed from the background that I had on the case in the press. And you know, it's different with the jurors consider only hearing witnesses in the courtroom and not being allowed to kind of, you know, take into account what they might have seen in the media. But it seemed like she was a victim of her mother as well. And I thought that was a really interesting way to go, to kind of paint her as the bad guy. He gets there and thinks that she's going to be so sick.
Yeah, and we're going to hear testimony from Gypsy because she takes the stand in Nicholas Godejohn's case. She was able to get a deal because she agreed to take the stand against her ex-boyfriend, Nick. By the way, the two of them met on a religious dating app. That's how they got together. But the question here is, you know, the sympathy that you feel for Gypsy, how much responsibility did she really have for what happened, considering, listen, it took two people and he was the one that actually did this brutal killing?
Right. I mean, the prosecution is going to have to kind of continue to paint her the way that I said, as a victim of her mother. But when he arrives there, after all of this deliberation, he should have known that he did not have to go through this plan to keep her safe. It's hard. I mean, there's manipulation that happens in relationships between young people and older people all the time that doesn't relate to murder or something so nefarious. And so it's really going to be interesting how they argue each of the things that come out in this trial.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, we're going to get into some of Gypsy Blanchard's testimony because it is just shocking to hear what she had to go through as a child. If you talk about someone that was failed over and over by the system and doctors and her own mother and even her father, who was not part of her life, it is just so tragic to hear. We're going to hear a bit of her story when we return from this break, and then we're going to get to how this plan was hatched to kill her mother. Why did she do it? Well, she says she felt like she couldn't be together with her boyfriend, and she felt like this was the only way out. Do you believe her? Do you believe that she was the manipulator like the defense wants you to believe? Well, let's take a listen to what she has to say when we return after this break. Godejohn is scheduled to be in court on Friday. He wants a new trial. If the judge denies that motion, the judge will move forward with sentencing. We're revisiting that case, and as I mentioned before the break, we're going to take you to Gypsy Blanchard's testimony. She is the girlfriend who copped a plea deal in order to point the finger at Nicholas Godejohn. Let's listen to what she said led up to this brutal murder, because she says she was the victim of abuse, and this was the only way out.
In June of 2015, were you in a wheelchair?
Yes.
Did Nick know you were in a wheelchair?
Yes.
Why were you in a wheelchair in June of 2015?
Because my mother forced me to be in one.
Do you know why you were forced to be in a wheelchair?
No, sir. She just forced me to be in one.
And how long had you been in a wheelchair as of June of 2015?
Since probably I was about 8 years old.
Was there a time between when you first were put in a wheelchair and June of 2015 that you figured out that you really didn't need to be in a wheelchair?
Yes.
When was that?
I always knew that I didn't need the wheelchair.
And how did you know that?
Because I could walk.
Did you and your mother obtain any kind of advantage by you being in a wheelchair?
Yes, sir.
What kind of advantage did you obtain?
Financial. attention, charity.
Financially mean money.
Yes, sir.
Did you obtain money as a result of you being in a wheelchair?
Yes, sir.
How did that work out? How did that happen?
Judge, I'm going to object to the relevance of that. There's been no connection that the defendant to any of this.
Well, I'm assuming, Mr. Perry, you're going to tie this up.
Well, right now. Did you and Nick ever talk about the fact that you didn't need to be in a wheelchair?
Yes.
Did you ever talk to him about why you were required to be in a wheelchair?
Yes.
I'll overrule the objection.
Were you ill during this period of time?
No, sir.
Did you ever tell Nick that you were ill or that you had illnesses?
I told him that I had illnesses. Yes, sir.
Did you ever tell him that you really weren't ill?
Yes, sir.
When did you tell him you really weren't ill?
The same time that I told him that I didn't need to be in the wheelchair.
What illnesses did you believe you had?
Cancer, muscular dystrophy. I needed glasses. I needed hearing aids. Seizure disorder. And I can't remember what else.
And when did you figure out that you weren't actually sick?
I started to piece things together when I was about 19 years old. Then I didn't understand the full extent of how healthy I was until after I got arrested.
So Gypsy Blanchard talking about Munchausen by proxy, which is the disease that her mother had, that inflicted on her, basically making her believe that she had all these different ailments and that she was in a wheelchair. I want to bring in my guest now, Marni Joe. What do you make of that direct testimony there?
I thought the testimony itself from Gypsy was good. I mean, she was obviously honest. She had obviously come clean in regards to all the things that she may have been complicit in with her mother. I just thought the questions were bizarre. I mean, the prosecutor was asking her, how did you and your mother obtain an advantage? I mean, and the jury, it looked as partially a fraudster, the star witness against Nicholas Godejohn. So I thought that was a little bit strange. I don't think I would have questioned her quite like that, but I think that she seemed very believable, and she seemed like she could be detail-oriented. But she pretty much admitted that she did a fraud. Right?
Marni Joe, I'm so sorry. We're having a little bit of difficulty. Sorry, Marni, we're having a little bit of difficulty hearing you. You keep breaking up. We're going to work to get you back on the line, a better connection. In the meantime, though, let's continue to listen to more of Gypsy's testimony while she took the stand in her ex-boyfriend's case.
Did you and Nick ever talk about this?
Yes,
Who initially brought up killing your mother?
I did.
Why not just tell somebody rather than kill your mother? Why was that not an option?
I truly didn't believe that nobody would believe me if I told anyone. My mother had legal documents in place saying that I was incompetent, and I thought that meant that if I went to anyone, the police, or told anyone, she would just have them convinced that I was making everything up.
At some point after you initially considered killing your mother, did you ever change your mind?
Yes.
Do you know when that was?
About 2 weeks before it happened.
And what was going on in your home life that made you reach the point where you did that or made that decision?
I was growing increasingly desperate to get out of my home life.
Did you tell Nick that?
Yes.
And what was your mom doing that caused you to be more desperate?
Things were getting physically and more physically abusive. The hitting.
Acting a certain way when you were in a wheelchair?
Yes, sir.
How was that?
She would have me stay very quiet and pretend like I couldn't walk.
Mr. Perry, can you pause for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's some more testimony from Gypsy Blanchard, just kind of heart-wrenching in so many ways, because you hear this abuse that she suffered as a child, and then you hear about this totally irrational plan that they plotted. But, you know, it seems to me in her head, she legitimately believed that this was the only way out of the pattern she was in. She wanted to be with this guy. Marni Jo, this was a defense witness. Gypsy was a defense witness. How does she do as a defense witness? Because, of course, they're trying to prove that he did not deliberate, right? And they're trying to get this down to second degree. They don't want him convicted on first degree.
Right. I mean, I think that she really is a witness for both sides, right? She has something to contribute to the trial for the prosecution and the defense. And sometimes it happens where the prosecution has to call a witness that's not perfect for them, that's not going to testify to every single thing that they wish had happened in this case, but they need to be the side that's open and honest about what they know, about the investigation that they did and how it went. And so I think that, you know, we'll see a little bit when you replay Cross about this going over the same thing, but in a spin for the defense.
Absolutely. But in terms of deliberation, when we talk about that specifically, have you heard yet, and I know we're just doing an abridged version of this trial, we're not able to get into all the nitty-gritty, but from what you know from following it, I think you were here when we covered it the first time live, did he exhibit evidence? Did he show that he did deliberate before he committed this alleged murder?
Right. Well, like I said, there's a difference between the quality of deliberations and the quantity. Certainly, they are able to prove a quantity of deliberation because there are extended conversations between the two parties. There is that he actually speaks about deliberation with that good angel and bad devil on his shoulders. I mean, that is deliberation in some respect. And also this large travel time, right, to get to her while pondering the killing. That certainly is going to be persuasive. I think it's about, is that a quality of deliberation that is appropriate, or was there manipulation and a diminished capacity because of his education or special education needs that maybe cut into that?
All right, so Marni Jo, we are going to hear from Nicholas Godejohn's own words. He talked to police after this happened. We're going to take you inside the interrogation room when we return. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Let's turn back now to the Nicholas Godejohn case. As I mentioned before the break, we're going to take you inside the interrogation room where he's asked by police what happened. Take a listen.
Invite Gypsy if you love her.
No, the truth is I worship her, so
I know
there's no way I would do her.
I know.
Thank her.
I know you do. I believe you do. But this is the point where you're going to prove whether you do or not, okay? When you talk. Okay? Because it's not fair. It's not fair to Gypsy for her to be honest and you to lie. Okay? So what I want to know is can you tell me this first? Did Gypsy know that you were going to kill her mother?
Honestly,
Gypsy never stabbed her?
She couldn't do it. That's the reason why she asked me to.
Okay. Did you try to get Gypsy to come in and stab her?
No, I would have never done that.
Okay. So when you say 4 actual stabs, so those are the ones that went in deeper?
Yeah.
Was there some little ones? Or?
There might have been, because the truth is that I counted the ones that went in deep. I didn't count if there's any other ones.
Okay. So if there's any other ones, you just didn't count those because they didn't go in as deep?
Yeah.
Okay. But you know that 4 of them went in deep?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know where those 4 deep ones were? Are you counting the one in the back of the neck or not in that 4?
No.
Okay, so the back of the neck would be something different.
Yeah, it's completely.
Okay, so we're listening to some of Nicholas Godejohn's police interrogation, and I don't know about you, Marni Jo, but I'm struck by almost how nonchalant he is at describing this really brutal, bloody murder.
Yeah, I mean, to me, actually, that kind of shows that incapacity that he might have. They said he was diagnosed with autism, and to me that makes perfect sense. You can also tell that he is responding to the way that the interviewer is discussing it with him. Like, I need the facts, I need to prove this, you give it to me. Almost like she's asking for clinical responses, and it makes it look so much worse for him. But I don't think that this is kind of how someone that didn't have autism or that wasn't in that situation would necessarily think about a murder. I mean, he talks about deliberations, how he knows that something's wrong. I'm sure that there is more emotion behind it. And that's why it's so hard to watch young people or people with disabilities be interrogated, is because you know there's other things there that are factors.
Exactly. And that's really what the defense is after, this diminished capacity, that the fact that he was on the autism spectrum, that he was under the, quote, spell of this powerful woman, if you will, that he wasn't able to deliberate or think ahead to what he did. So what I find interesting here is that Gypsy Blanchard was a defense witness. She was brought and testified on behalf of the defense. And the prosecutor had a chance to do some cross-examination. And during this cross-examination of Gypsy Blanchard, she starts putting some of the blame on Nick and not just herself. Let's listen to that.
It would be easier for you to get a knife because you could steal it because you would be in the wheelchair, correct?
Correct.
And you knew that the defendant had researched knives online.
Correct.
And at first, he actually wanted you to get like a big machete type knife.
Yes.
But you didn't think that that would be a lot harder to probably wheel out of Walmart, is that right?
That is correct.
So, although he wanted the big machete, you basically saw a knife that you thought you could get out of Walmart.
Yes, sir.
And then you took a picture of that knife.
Yes, sir.
And you sent that to the defendant.
Yes, sir.
To make sure that he approved of that knife.
That is correct.
And he did, ultimately.
Yes.
So, before June 10th, in preparation for the murder, fair to say the defendant wanted to take steps to muffle her.
That is correct.
And the defendant wanted to take steps to keep her from fighting back.
That is correct.
Okay, so that is the cross-examination by the prosecutor of Gypsy Blanchard. And I'm sure, Marni Jo, you noticed, like I did, how careful and meticulous the prosecutor was pointing out all these various steps that Nicholas Godejohn did in order to aid and to help conspire to kill DeeDee Blanchard, reflecting on what kind of murder weapon that they were going to use and other items.
I think that was actually really important. That's that quality of planning that they're looking for, right? So when he's talking about what knife to get or getting a machete or making sure she can't fight back, that's actually picturing a murder, right? That's thinking really about what you're going to do, not necessarily about the necessity of saving your girlfriend, like we talked about as might be the defense. Or that's not part of the manipulation by Gypsy as to how it has to happen in her mind. And so what they're saying there, I think, is that this is real deliberation by Godejohn and him himself, right? He's having independent thoughts about this. He's picturing it in a certain way, and he wants it to be done in a certain way. And so that's much more compelling than just, having a conversation with her where there's this back and forth online that we heard about before. I think this is him having his own thoughts.
Yes, certainly. And I do want to add the two of them had the brilliant plan not to get rid of the murder weapon, that knife that you saw in a picture there, but they actually mailed it to his home in the Midwest. And that was a key piece that the police used in order to put this all together. Okay, so when we return, we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll give you the verdict. No surprise there, but you want to hear it firsthand. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Let's take you back to Missouri, where, as I said before the break, we're going to give you the verdict in the first-degree murder case against Nicholas Godejohn. Take a listen.
The court has reviewed the verdicts and finds them to be in order. It will now announce the verdicts. As to count one, we, the jury, find the defendant, Nicholas Godejohn, guilty of murder in the first degree, as submitted in instruction number 6. We assess and declare the punishment for murder in the first degree at imprisonment for life without the possibility of probation or parole. As to count 2, and that's signed by the foreperson. As to count 2, we, the jury, find the defendant, Nicholas Godejohn, guilty of armed criminal action as submitted in instruction number 10, signed by the foreperson. Ladies and gentlemen, because only the foreperson signs the verdict form.
All right, so there you heard it. That was the guilty verdict in the case against Nicholas Godejohn. The co-defendant in this case, Gypsy Blanchard, who you heard take the stand, she, before this case against her boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn, went to trial. She entered a plea deal with prosecutors where she got 10 years for murdering her mother. And the prosecutor at the time, Marni Joe, said, you know, he felt like he could have gotten a first-degree murder conviction where she would have been sentenced to life. But based on the abuse that she suffered as a child, he did not think that that was a fair outcome in this case. Because some people might say, wow, look at the discrepancy here. This woman, Gypsy Blanchard, gets 10 years in prison, and Nicholas Godejohn is convicted and has a life sentence. He's going to be formally sentenced on Friday. Is that fair? Is that justice?
I mean, I think that it makes a lot of sense to offer Gypsy a plea deal where the sentence is much lower. She's a juvenile at the time. She certainly suffered a lot of abuse at the hands of the victim of the homicide. She's been in a prison of a wheelchair at her mother's command. She was 8 years old. I'm just sad because I think that the sentence of a mandatory life sentence for Nicholas Godejohn is something that, you know, we need to kind of think about and re-examine. And so, you know, the verdict for me, being that he had autism and was a juvenile at the time of the offense, is, I find it to be very harsh, but absolutely within the confines of the law.
And again, as I mentioned before, we are expecting a motions hearing on Friday. Nicholas Godejohn wants a new trial, but if the judge denies that motion, they're going to move forward with sentencing on that day, but it's a mandatory life sentence from what I understand, so it doesn't seem like this guy will see the light of day anytime soon.
No, and I think that there would have had to be an error that was egregious during the trial for the judge to order a new trial at this level and disrupt a jury's verdict. So I think that's going to be a really hard way to go. I think that, you know, things might change in how we view this case. Whenever, as a defense attorney, I see a case like this, I always think to myself, what did they offer him? You know, was this where, you know, his attorneys couldn't really build a relationship with him, or they could help him save himself? Or was there something more that was there? Is there something that we don't know about? Because really, you know, a life sentence in this kind of case where we have a victim that did inflict years and years of abuse on someone who this person with autism thought that he loved, you know, is a really just tragedy for everyone.
Yeah, it's a tragedy all around, but as I mentioned, we are recapping the Nicholas Godejohn case. He was convicted of that first-degree murder charge. He has a motions hearing on Friday. We'll be sure to update you on that. In the meantime, we're going to take you to California for the McStay family murders trial in just a few minutes. We have to take a quick break, but when we return, we're going to bring you highlights from that case and bring you expert legal analysis. Stay with us here on the Law and Crime Network.